Ok, perfetto. Ok, va bene.
Ciao Ale.
Ok. Si vede? Prova a fare il refresh. Prova a fare caricare la pagina. Ok. Sì, tranquillo. Ok, ciao. Va bene, ciao. Messenger se sai.
Where's your
Mhm.
meet again?
Yeah, it's gonna say chat and answer. That's okay. Can I say something?
Mhm.
You have Facebook on your phone?
Yeah.
Can you check if this is working in my Facebook?
Are your friends watching?
Yeah. I think so.
Where do I go?
I just need my profile. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
Vieni qua. Buongiorno Carlo. Come stai? Tutto bene? Come andate il weekend?
Ma senti, was it on purpose that you planned your Defense on Earth Day? That's what we were wondering. I was like,
So did you plan on Defense on Pasquetta?
that's true. Hey guys.
How was the clinic? It's good?
Yeah, actually, like we were climbing in this cave, so we're only places in which it's not too wet.
You're good?
Oh, I'm struggling.
Cathedral, there were like the normal walls
Get
were
ready,
really
guys.
like
Tears
drinking
again.
water
Well,
all the
probably
time.
like
There was
this.
like blocks of ice falling. Sometimes you could hear like this actual ice.
On the
Oh, if I
on the
can
north
get through my
side,
defense without
the-
crying, it's going to be.
Yeah, we're on the north side,
We'll cover our eyes.
but yeah, like all over around. Like,
But you like
so you could hear something.
no,
Like,
no. I have
Oh.
slides.
That's fine.
Oh,
There's like
Okay.
sometimes
But,
people
the
hanging
dissertation
around
was
the
so
going to
nice.
the other side of the cathedral, and the guy is just like, that's not a good idea.
My parents
Oh, cool. Yesterday.
Yeah, it was basically a timing.
We
live streaming
Juma.
on the YouTube.
Yeah, and then we learned how to hold backpacks and
that's an important thing.
Yeah.
like all the logistics.
Yeah.
Like,
So maybe I'm just gonna leave my computer.
Yeah, one day we have to do it.
I don't need to check
Yeah,
those, right?
that's
I don't know
okay.
how to
Okay.
do
I don't want
how to swim from my
Good.
reverse.
It's gonna get comfortable.
Yeah.
Chad's gonna do like those.
Oh, how to
down,
swing on it.
I just
Like-
like
I mean, like you are ascending something, and then you're cleaning a piece of protection. Maybe the other piece of protection is kind of 5 meters apart. And you're cleaning that, and then you're gonna swing like 5 meters, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do that. If you want to,
Thanks for coming.
How you doing?
Good.
Let's imagine on the wall.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Little little.
Let's get away from
Okay. You use like
You couldn't find your trousers?
you leave like a little sling. And then you follow the sling. So why you remove the protection?
Which version do you
No, right?
Okay.
That's right. No, I don't. I must find you
Oh, okay, turn around and go back up Oxford Street. Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So much of
Girl,
support.
Yeah, it's great. Yes, yeah.
Hey, good to see you. Yeah.
What's that?
Is he dressed up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like I should have left, so my mama is gonna complain.
Oh yeah, of course, your mom's gonna play.
I have.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, we probably should. I don't know if he's ever seen one of these.
we could do that right now.
I'm Jeff, by the
Hi,
way.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Same.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Everyone's coming, but Alex sounds like.
Oh, really good.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I'm not sure where I can be there.
I can't even see them in the crowd. I just
Yeah, no, I,
want you to know it's fine.
you know, if I'm just, there you go. No, if I mention, mention Sam, I don't say it, I'm like, I feel bad. Close your camera. Thanks so much about like 10 days ago when we saw you all the
Oh, I wasn't
password
there.
and everything.
Yeah.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. Yes, but
We only have one more in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah. I just need to talk slowly.
Yeah. Do you want us to give you a signal? Like,
Oh, yeah. You can do that.
how long is it?
Oh, well, yeah.
So I try to keep it like
I was
30 to 35. And then another 20. Yeah. Or if you want to do a full hour.
No,
No.
it's good. I want the like real technical details.
No questions.
And then private questions.
And then private questions.
And just half an hour?
Maybe questions, like from the audience, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then from private.
Should we ask something?
Oh, okay, so it's last question.
I can give you a list in a sec.
Free approval.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to learn about
I mean, not really talking about that.
Are you gonna talk about the future?
And very,
In which sense?
Okay, are you gonna say, I guess, what you're gonna do after?
Very smart.
Share
Yeah, you say
that.
that.
No.
Basically just came here, worked really hard, to get tenure, and then immediately go into
Well, I mean,
you
spent your way
traveling.
Well, that's
He waited for time. I just tried.
Yeah. And he's like,
You want to know what
he's with your, just so great.
I'm actually.
Yeah, right.
Which they started, which they started.
Oh, I don't know. I've been speaking with
So we did the six
Was it good?
You guys do the point legends?
Yeah, actually, like, yeah, doing a YouTube for my
Doing
friends.
YouTube live.
Okay.
I will.
You're doing YouTube live?
Yeah.
All that?
I guess our class can.
Well, you're usually you can help.
Yes.
So I think we should take that.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. What do we have to do? I mean, it's a pretty long email.
It's,
Is that the thing with early Mays? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. This was an NSF something,
It's
right?
just a process.
Yes. I guess it would be history.
And then achieve it.
Oh, okay.
And then if she wants to have much more.
Yeah, no, I know. It's real long. I mean,
maybe even Friday. I just
I could, yeah, I could probably.
Maybe later.
Okay. Follow up on this.
No, I don't want to do. I can't. I have too many.
maybe for another year.
Okay. Sure. Okay. I'm certain.
It seems like a good idea.
Mhm. Well, I mean, it looks like,
So she invited her.
yeah, in person. Not these people, I didn't know the one that.
He's
No problem. Public health person. Oh, he's the, okay.
He's the one that did the visualization.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. This type thing. No, I haven't seen this. Good job. That's really great. Beautiful.
Anyway, so he's doing that.
Oh, this is like some really quite long things. Which one is it? When is it? You know? Oh, it's for a week of June. I'll be about it. Yeah. No.
I'm
Too young.
very.
Actually, cold. Talking. I see you. I'll do your All right. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure today to introduce Carlo Alberto Amade. He's been at Harvard for about 5 years now, and over that time he's worked on a range of different topics involving graphene oxide in terms of just materials and as well as applications. And so he'll give his presentation, and we'll ask some questions, and then we'll ask you guys to go, and then bring him back. But without further ado, Carlo, please.
Okay, thanks everyone for being here. Today's a special day because it's actually Earth Day. So on April 22nd, we are celebrating Earth Day, which is a call for environmental protection. And hopefully we're gonna celebrate something else today. And I'm gonna talk about how nanotechnology can be used for environmental applications. And in particular, how can we nano-engineering graphene oxide for water treatment applications. The agenda for today, so I will start with an introduction. I will describe what is graphene oxide, and then I will dive into application. So I will discuss graphene oxide membranes and fully carbon membranes. And finally, I will end with some future directions. All the work presented here is original work contained in these scientific articles. I think there is just one slide that is not contained in this work. Okay, so let's start. Introduction. So the interaction between humans and water manifests into two dimensions. We have clean access to water and safe sanitation services. When one of these, and both of these dimensions are needed for sustainable development. However, there are different factors that influences this interaction. First, we have climate change. And climate change exacerbates the risk of water availability. And for instance, I've been here since 2014, and every year was a major drought all over the world. 2015 was Brazil, 2016 was California, 17 Iran, 18 South Africa, and actually this year that actually affects me because northern Italy is in a drought. The other big factor that influences this interaction is a change in water demand, mainly due to population growth and rapid urbanizations. However, when this system is broken, we have a water crisis. And this crisis can vary to a certain degree depending on the region of the world. But all over the world, still now, there are 2 billion people without access to drink water services and 4.5 billion people that don't have access to sanitation services. And if we're not doing anything, this picture is not getting any better because the water consumption is projected to increase by 150% by the end of this century. So mainly water is extracted in terms of groundwater. Groundwater is actually the most extracted resource all over the world, about 1,000 cubic kilometers every year. Just to give you an idea, 1,000 cubic kilometers is just like a cube extending from here to downtown Boston. And this black dot represents annual oil extraction, and the blue array are the groundwater extraction. And half of the population relies on groundwater for drinking purposes, and also half of the agriculture mostly is relying on groundwater. However, we're extracting at a rate that is not sustainable. Then we have 20% of the aquifers all over the world that are overexploited. That means the recharge rate is smaller than the extraction rate. And we have 4.5 billion people that are living in water-stressed area for at least a month every year. So this is a really unsustainable picture. So we gotta find alternatives. So what can we do? So we can use wastewater as a resource. How wastewater works, you have wastewater and then you have 3 primary steps. You have primary steps to remove solid and particulate. You have secondary steps to removing carbon content, especially through biological processes. And then you have a tertiary step to remove nitrogen and phosphorus. However, if you want to reclaim the water, you need to have some polishing step. And this is actually water reclaiming is reusing wastewater. And membrane technology can be used in the first 3 steps as an alternative to traditional use technology. But membranes is actually the only solution for this polishing step. So just to recap, what is a membrane? It's a semi-permeable material, and there is a pressure that's been applied, and water goes from the feed side to the permeate side through this porous semi-permeable material, and larger contaminants are blocked, and just by physical exclusion. Most of the membranes used in the industry are polymeric membranes, but they have 2 major drawbacks. One is biofouling. So these membranes tend to build up a carbon layer on the surface, and this tends to clog the membrane. So membrane, they need to be cleaned with chemical agents, and these though reduce the lifetime of these membranes because polymeric membranes have poor chemical resistance. So researchers try to avoid this shortcoming by coming up with new materials, and one of these materials is graphene oxide. Why graphene oxide? Because it's chemically stable, it's thermally stable, is ultra thin. So the thickness is really important because the pressure you need to apply to have the water flowing through this membrane is proportional to the thickness. So if you can make something ultra thin, that means you have to use less pressure and then less energy. And you can tune the pore size, and it's intrinsically anti-fouling. So you remember this carbon layer that creates, this organic layer that creates on the surface, in graphene oxide tends not to form. And finally, you can functionalize, which is just a fancy word that means you can attach molecules to it. How does it work? So basically, you can take just a graphene oxide flake, and then you stack flakes on top of each other, and then you're creating like a sort of a nanochannel here. And water is small enough that it can go through this nanochannel, but larger molecules, just by physical exclusion, cannot go through it. Thus, you create like a porous membrane. So now that this was the end of the introduction, so let's dive in and understand more what is graphene oxide. So graphene oxide is a monatomic material, so one atom thick, and all the carbon atoms are arranged in a honeycomb lattice or a sp2. And however, this is a graphene oxide, so that means you have oxygen functionalities, especially you have on the edges some carboxylate group, and on the basal plane you have epoxide and hydroxide. So just think as like a graphene sheet, but then you have some oxygen functionality that decorate this graphene sheet. And this is just a figure to represent all the property of graphene oxide. With scanning electron microscopy, we can get some images of the single flakes, and we can see the scale bar is like basically a tenth of a human hair. We can see that the flakes are just like micrometer size. With atomic force microscopy, we can check the thickness of this material, and we can see that it's actually like monolayer, and the thickness is between 1 to 2 nanometer. With Raman spectroscopy, we can check the sp2 nature of the material through the G peak. And we have like X-ray diffraction, from now on just XRD. And basically XRD is really important because it tells us like how these layers are stuck and the separation distance between the layer. And the separation distance is like 8 Armstrong, so less than a nanometer. And then another important technique to characterize graphene oxide is X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy, XPS. So basically here, just like binding energies that are unique to specific bonds. And we can see that the graphene oxide is really like oxidized, and we can have like epoxy and hydroxide groups, about 287 electron volt. And we have like double bonds, mainly carboxylate, at 289 electron volt. We can also do like some Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, but this is not really quantitative, so we stick mainly to XPS. But what is cool, really cool about graphene oxide, that there are all these properties, but we can really tune, these properties. And so what we can do, for instance, we can tune the oxidation. So how much of this oxygen is contained in the graphene oxide? Here you have 6 samples, and what I'm varying here is the amount of oxygen. And you can see it goes from a dark to more like yellowish solution. And these, like the graphene oxide, are flakes suspended in the solution. And we can check the XPS spectra. And what we can see here is that if you're going from sample 1, which is like low oxygen, to sample 6, high oxygen, just have a look at this central peak, and you can see that it's increasing. And this central peak is mainly due to the epoxide and hydroxide functional groups. So here I show you that we can tune the chemistry, but you can also tune the morphology of the material. Here I'm just preparing like a material. The scale bar is the same. So I prepare a material with large flakes. I can prepare a material with small flakes, or a material with like small and big flakes. And just some like through quick image analysis, we can check the distribution size of the material. It follows a log normal distribution. And here we have like about 5 micrometers square flake size. Here we have sub micrometer square flake size. And then we push this further. So with other like imaging techniques, what we did, we can also count the percentage of monolayer versus multilayer material. And this is really important because when you're producing graphene oxide, ideally you want to have like all flakes to be monolayer, but not all the processes are perfect. So you end up having some material which is multilayer. But with these imaging techniques, we can check basically the quality of the material. So I show you like we can tune the chemistry, we can tune the morphology of this material, and this is what we did in this first paper. What we did, so we took like graphene oxide flakes, and then we gave some energy and enough for the flakes to scroll on itself and form this beautiful structure. These are graphene oxide nanoscrolls. And we can like modify the morphology of these flakes and the configuration. So we could obtain, for instance, like narrow and wide tubes, and also in cone and tube configuration. We could have a control in these features, like if they were narrow or wide. Honestly, like cone and tube, we didn't have so much control on that. And so actually an example, how we can use like the morphology to create this beautiful architecture. Here what I did, I compiled all the studies of graphene oxide. So basically like each of the count is a scientific publication. And depending on the flake size that the researcher were using. And you can see that the flake size varies about like 4 or 5 order of magnitude. So there is in the dimension of flakes used by researchers. Same thing is also for the chemistry. So we have like oxygen to carbon ratio, which is a measure of the chemistry, so of the atoms inside the material. And we can see that graphene oxide in blue has a variation of the OC ratio between 0.3 to 0.8. The mean is about 0.5 to 0.4 to 0.5. When we have reduced graphene oxide, there is a shift. And this is like, makes sense because the reduced graphene oxide, that means you are stripping some of the oxygen. And so, of course, you have like a decrease of the oxygen to carbon ratio. And then you have in green, multi-layer graphene oxide. Multi-layer graphene oxide is when instead of having like just a monatomic sheet, you have a multi-layer, but you cannot have like oxygen functionalization in between the layers. So this is why you have a lower oxygen content. So we did something else. So for papers that actually were reporting both the morphology and the chemistry, we just plot them into a space. So each of these dot is just a scientific publication, and we just run a clustering algorithm. And what we could see here is actually that there is not just one kind of graphene oxide, but with 6 classes, we were explaining 90% of the variance in the field. And okay, so what did I tell you basically in the last 10 slides? That graphene oxide is a really cool material. We can tune its properties. However, since you can tune these properties, like there is a lot of noise in the field, so we suggested a classification scheme that allows researchers to talk the similar wavelength, similar language. And also we propose fast standardization and classification technique. Okay, so now that hopefully we have more or less an understanding of what is a graphene oxide, let's look at some applications. So our lab does like water treatment. And when you have a new material, first things you wanna figure it out is like how the water flows inside your material. When I started this field in 2015, when I joined this field in 2015, there were like mainly there was a debate with 2 points of view. On the one hand, people said that basically like water flows inside this nanomaterial and frictionless, so it doesn't feel the effect of the wall. And this is similar to what has been reported in carbon nanotubes. And there was another point of view that basically says, no, there must be some sort of like friction. And you can see here with molecular dynamics result, you can see that actually like the velocity profile is parabolic. So there is an effect of the wall. And when you have to model this system, you can have 2 approaches. So on the one hand, you can use like macroscale equation. So they require the medium to be continuous, and basically you're solving Navier-Stokes equation. On the other hand, what you can do, you can track single particles, and through, for instance, molecular dynamics. Here we have Jeffrey Grossman, who is basically one of the main experts in the field. And when you can use one approach compared to the other one is defined by the Knudsen number, which is the mean free path lambda divided by the characteristic length. So basically, like in a macro scale example, for instance, when the L is pretty big, just imagine like a pipe, the Knudsen number is really small because L is big, so you can use continuum approaches. Whereas like when the dimension are really small, you better use like some molecular dynamics approach. Hypothetically, you can push this one towards the macro scale equation, but then you have issue with the computational power. However, there is all this gray area where actually graphene oxide system lays. So the Knudsen number for graphene oxide is between 0.01 to 10, depending on the morphology. And here we are the mesoscale. And for the first time, what we did, we used mesoscale simulation to model this system. And what we did, we used lattice-Boltzmann equation. Just to give you an idea, it's called lattice-Boltzmann because instead of tracking like just one particle, you're tracking a distribution of particles. And the particles cannot move anywhere in the field, but just in a certain direction of the lattice. And this system is really periodic, so we can isolate a periodic cell. And this is just an example of a fluidodynamic simulation. But let's jump into the main results. So what I want you to pay attention is that the separation distance between the flakes is 2h, defined as 2h, whereas the extent of the friction is W. So what I'm doing here, I'm plotting the ratio between W and 2h, and here is just the permeability, so how much water goes through the material. When W is equal to 0, basically there is no friction, we obtain a permeability about 1,000 LMH bar. This, though, is really off compared to experimental results, which are this dashed line. So by putting W equals to 0, that means we're in the frictionless scenario, and we're really off with experimental results. So, but when we put actually W equal to 0.2, that means W is 20% of the separation distance. So if the separation distance is 1 nanometer, W will be 0.2 nanometer. We have a really good matching with experimental result. And this is really good because W equals 0.2 nanometer. This is exactly the extent of hydroxide and epoxide functionalities. So there is a good match between theoretical and experimental results. So we kind of like, cautiously reject this view, compare, and we actually accept this view where there is some sort of friction. And I say cautiously because this was first proposed in a science paper, and Geim was in this paper. The physicists in the room will know, was a Nobel Prize winner for physics in 2010. So, you just want to chill, right? Okay. And so now that you understand how the water flows in this material, let's do more and see if you can tune the nanoproperties of this material in order to tune the water transport in the material. So what we did, we defined like a goal, which is a graphene oxide architectural laminate. Here you see NSEM images. Basically, you see here is the thin graphene oxide layer sitting on top of a polymer substrate. And we call it like architectural laminate because what we want to do, we want to change its architecture. How are we going to do that? So first of all, we can just smush the structure. So you see the separation distance is decreased. Or what we can do, we can change the flake size. And how can we do that? So we can change the flake size with ultrasound irradiation. So you see like big flake size compared to smaller flake size. Here we're reducing the size about an order of magnitude. Changing the chemistry is a bit more complicated. Or changing the chemistry or basically reducing the separation distance is a bit more complicated. So again, what we did for the first time, we exposed graphene oxide in vacuum to UV irradiation. So what is happening here? Here I'm increasing the irradiation time from 0 minutes to basically 1400 minutes. As you can see, the C1s spectra, XPS spectra, is modified, right? And from this, you can infer that the oxygen percentage is changing from 35% to 20%. So what is happening? We're basically removing some of these oxygen functionalities. But does this mean that we actually smooshing the structure? In order to do that, we have to check with XRP. And what we see here, we see this peak. You see it's just changing and it's moving towards higher degree. That actually means that the structure is smooshing. So basically the separation distance goes from 8 angstrom to about 6 angstrom. So we are really going from this scenario to that scenario. So we are finely tuning this material, and the tuning is it's pretty good. I mean, you can tune at the angstrom level. And so when we observe for the first time in this plot, we say, oh, the the signal from XPS and XRD must be correlated somehow. So we just plot it, and so we just fit a line. And this trend was pretty good because when we obtain, your experimental fitting, if you plug in oxygen equals to 0, that means like the graphene oxide doesn't have any oxide, so it's just graphene. We obtain a separation distance of 3.5 angstrom, and this is a really good matching with theoretical experimental result that said the separation distance of graphene is 3.4. So this was pretty good. And also what this tells us that instead of calculating like the oxygen content through XPS, I can just do XRT and just obtaining the oxygen content, or vice versa. So we are really speeding up the characterization process of this material. So, but let's see how the water transport modifies when we're going from this structure to that structure. We see that the water transport expressing permeability changes dramatically from 3.5 to like about 0.5 LMH bar, and also the hydrophobicity changes, and hydrophobicity is captured with contact angle, so we obtain a more hydrophobic structure. And but when we're trying to change it, on the other hand, the flake size, we did not see any change or a big change in the permeability. So what does this mean? What does it mean? That basically, like, what really controls the water transport in this material is the separation distance, as it was proven by simulations before. Again, just to recap this part, what I showed for the first time, we simulated like graphene oxide system with mesoscale simulations, and also we could really tune at the angstrom level its structure, and we could see the effect of this modification of the structure in the permeability. Then we wanted to do like again a step further. So most of the researchers are using graphene oxide to fabricate membranes, but they're still casting graphene oxide onto a polymer. And so basically, the motivation why using graphene oxide is because it's superior to a polymer. But then if you're casting onto a polymer, then you're back to square one. So what we wanted to do is to create like a fully carbon membrane without the use of polymers. And moreover, the membrane technology field is split. So on one side, you have the polymeric membranes, which have low thickness, ability to operate in nanofiltration regime, and low cost. And on the other side, you have like ceramic membranes, which have high chemical resistance, thermal resistance, and also ease of clean. So when we're combining and making this fully carbon membrane, polymer-free, we just want to try to combine the main advantages of the two fields. So let's see how we did that. So instead of using a polymeric support, we use a support made of carbon fiber layer and carbon nanotubes layers. And here you see just a cross-sectional image of the membrane. It's about half of a millimeter, and it's mainly just all the thickness of the carbon fiber. But if you're zooming on the top part, we can see the carbon nanotubes layer is about like 10 micron, and here you can barely see there is this really thin graphene oxide layer. If you're seeing like a bird view, we can see like micrometer size carbon fiber layer, nanometer size nanotubes, and then the graphene oxide layer on top. So basically, we're creating this hierarchical structure going from micrometer to nanometer to atomic size. And these are more like SEM images of the structure. We have the carbon fiber layer. In the middle column, we have CNT carbon nanotubes layer. And the third, we have graphene oxide layer. And here, I'm just increasing the magnification. And you can see, we can see the single carbon fiber layer. Here, we can see actually the multi-wall carbon nanotubes. And here, we have graphene oxide, which is like uniformly covers all the support. So now that we created this membrane, we test the performances, the performance. How we did that, we have this large filtration setup. And you can see here, like these are like the cases where the membranes are. And here is just a feed tank where basically we artificially contaminate the water in order to check the performance of the membranes. And here is just the control. And here we have, you cannot really see, here is the pump. So let's look at the main results. So this membrane can modestly reject monovalent ions. So this was already reported in the literature that this membrane they don't do a great job in removing like monovalent ions, but they're doing a really good job rejection of almost like 90% of multivalent salts or ions. And the permeability is about 1 to 2 LMH bar, and the pore size, so the nanochannel is about 1 to 2 nanometer. So this membrane can really work in the nanofiltration regime. The nanofiltration regime is really important because it's the regime that you need to have in wastewater reclamation on the reuse of wastewater. So we proved that this membrane can work in wastewater. However, we wanted to check their chemical stability. How we did that? So here I'm plotting like rejection before and after chlorination. Chlorination is a method just to check the stability of the membrane. So what I did, I just like have a highly like concentrated bleach solution going through the membrane for about 8 hours. And I'm checking the chlorine and sulfate rejection. And before and after chlorination, it's basically the same. So this membrane can resist this chemical agent screening. We also check through XPS the chemical fingerprint of the membranes. It's basically really similar. Maybe there is just a bit of oxidation happening in the membrane. So here we prove that the membrane are chemically stable. Let's see if the membrane are also thermally stable. What we did, we subject the membranes to annealing cycle. Annealing cycle means just you put the membrane in a tube furnace and you ramp up the temperature. Here the temperature is set to 150 degrees. And you can see after the first anneal, second, third, and fourth anneal, there's basically no change in the chemistry of the material. So these membranes are resistant to these thermal cycles. What we did also is like you can do thermogravimetrical analysis. So basically you just observe the mass change when you're changing the temperature. And what you can see here, graphene oxide is this green material, is this green line, and then zoom in says that up to 400 C, you're basically losing just 0.2% of its mass. Compared to a traditional polymer, which is the blue dashed line, that basically is decomposing. You can see that at 400 C is already lost like 50% of its mass. So again, what I showed here. So for the first time, we created a fully carbon membrane that can merge, that can operate in the nanofiltration regime, which is used in wastewater treatment, but is also chemically and thermally stable. And how we did that is to create this hierarchical structure made of carbon fiber, carbon nanotubes, and graphene oxide. Let's move now to future investigation. So if a killer application would be found in graphene oxide, we might expect an increase in the synthesis of this material, so a possible increase in the release into the environment, and then like a possible increase in the human exposure to this material. And we have to be really concerned about this because also the EPA is monitoring this nanomaterial, and there are also like previous report that said this nanomaterial might be toxic for humans. And there are two main mechanisms of toxicity. So one is actually like just a physical damage of the cell membrane. So basically this material is so sharp that it can penetrate the double cell wall and just like basically destroy the cell. The other mechanism basically says that graphene oxide might be involved in the production of reactive oxygen species that it can alter the cell wall, or even worse, they can alter the metabolic function of the cell. So in our case, we're making this membrane for water treatment, right? So the main exposure path will be like ingestion. But this membrane, I show you, like this material is really like metastable. That means it can really interact with the environment. And so also it can really interact with the human body. So in collaboration with the School of Public Health, what we did like a GI tract simulator, so a gastrointestinal tract simulator, and we have the graphene oxide going through this simulator. So it's going through a mouth phase, a stomach phase, and a small intestine phase. It's nothing too fancy, it's just basically a beaker that resembles these three environments. And after that, we are checking the toxicity of this graphene oxide. And in the meantime, we're also checking how the material modifies in this environment. So let's see what happens. So on the left, you see like graphene oxide before digestion, and then the right after digestion. And we can see that the chemistry is really changing. It goes from an oxygen to carbon ratio of 0.5 basically to 0.25. So what does this mean? That all the previous studies, they're measuring like the toxicity of this material. They don't have to be discarded, but you need to consider that this material is interacting with the human body. So possibly you have to check the toxicity of this configuration of the material. So the chemistry is changing a lot when it's going through this GI tract simulator, whereas the morphology is not changing. It's not changing much. So then what we did, we checked just cell viability of epithelium cell. So the white histogram are just like controls, so you can disregard them. And here, what we did, we could just like control cell medium with 10 ppm of GO. And actually, the cell viability is about like 100%. So we didn't observe any meaningful biological process going on here. Also, like we took like the digest. So what is coming out from this like GI tract simulator, always with 10 ppm of the GO that is being going through all these three environments. And even here, we didn't see any toxicity. Again, this is a preliminary result because we're checking just one cell culture, and it's just a one concentration, even if it's really high. But we were lucky. Not lucky. Like we were like happy to see these results because you work for 4 years on this project, and maybe you find out that it's all toxic, and yeah, throwing it away. So yeah, we're just like happy to see these results. And with this positive note, I would like to end this talk. And I just want to thank the collaborators, Jeffrey Grossman and all his group for the meaningful discussion that we have on graphene oxide. I really appreciate. And Elsie's group, they adopted me in my last year. Thanks, Elsie. And I really also want to thank Prentice. I don't know if I will ever be a PI, but Prentice, I think is the kind of figure you want to have in your lab, because I don't know, it just gives makes the lab working, I think. So thanks, Prentice, for all the support. So I want to thank the Harvard School of Public Health Nano Center. So we're carrying out the studies of toxicity with them. And of course, this will not, you see a lot of characterization, and this will not have happened without the Center of Nanoscale system. Thanks, Greg, for all the help with the XPS and everything. I kept on working with people at Lens. See, ZJ. This was my former lab when I was in the Emirates, and we're still working together. And I appreciate that there is still this collaboration going on. The DC Institute, even if I'm not part of the DC, they just let me use all their tools. So thank you. And then we have the NRC in Italy, CNR. They help me out a lot with the simulation. So basically, I was doing all this simulation in MATLAB. Taking me forever to run. Then I give to this guy, and the simulation runs in 1 minute. So, okay. And then also ES91R. This is a class at Harvard that allows undergrad students to work on a graduate research project, and the possibility to work with 5 undergrad students. And I'm thankful for that. Funding sources: the Bureau of Reclamation, AMTA, the American Membrane Technology Association, and above all, KIGAM. Of course, this would not have happened with this guy, Chad. And, in every work you saw, Chad has his touch, so Chad's touch, basically it improved really the work, and it brought you to a different level. Of course, after 4 years, he's not just an advisor, he's a friend. So here's 2 of us chilling in Italy. And here you see this is Marmolada Glacier. It's the largest glacier in the Eastern Alps. It's melting pretty fast, so if you want to go soon. But thank you, Chad, so much. I really appreciate your support. Of course, in my first 4 years, I was in the facilities lab, and it was just we had really good fun together. And a big shout out to my mentors, I think Greg, Maria, and Andrea. And here we're just doing random activities together, playing volleyball at the Rhino Cup. Han was getting married here. Yeah, really good time together. Outside the lab, I had the opportunity to meet amazing people, and actually I met all these people at the orientation, and we are still friends. So it's just a really long-lasting bonding experience. It's really good. And this is one of the first pictures we took together. You can see because David looks like 16. Also, I looks pretty young. And in these years, like we took care of each other. It's Cesar taking care of Sam. Like we had like amazing food together. Amazing food apart from this. So I made this vegan brownie, and they look like excrement. And as you can imagine, like I brought the entire train back home. Like, no one ate them, And we had fun together. This is a really good, this is a really fun game. So basically, you have to exchange an apple without the use of hands, but the apple is squeezed between your chin and your chest. And it's a kind of fun game. And we have more fun. And for people who know Christina, you can really hear her laugh here. Yeah, it's really good time together. We grow together, celebrate birthday. I think this is Sam's 30th. This is my 30th, and yeah, really good time together. Thank you guys. And I spent a lot of time in the outdoors to the mountaineering club. Here is like a picture of us like on Mount Rainier last summer at the summit. We're all happy. But this was just 24 hours before. The summit was really far away. We're really tired as David's trying to camouflage in here. It's just like, this is like really feeling the altitude, I think. And yeah, so sometimes it can be really cold. This was like on Mount Washington. It was like the coldest Thanksgiving day in a century or something. You cannot really see this is Enrico, but it's just like doing mountaineering, just think about beauty. Like you see this really beautiful landscape. Here we're in the Alpine Garden of Mount Washington. But above all, it's just meaningful connections. And I really like develop really good friendship and relationship in this through this club. I really like this picture because we all look happy, apart from Vlad. And I think the reason why, because Vlad didn't get his luggage. We were in Iceland here. Vlad didn't get his luggage, so he didn't have proper like equipment and gear. So I think he's just really feeling the cold here. Yeah, also like I hang out a lot with the Arboretum Studio Society, and sometimes we organize like we do events with politicians and other like important figures, but most of the time it's just about food. You can get more Italian than this. We see some pasta competition, some aperitivo, some picnics, so mainly related to food. And this brings me back to Italy. I know there's my friends following me through the live. And when I go back to Italy, nothing changes, right? So the street cleaners are still the same, and so are the friends. I'm still hanging out with high school friends. And this is just like, it's great, nothing's changing over there. And this brings me back to my family. So basically, like, I analyze a lot the relationship with my parents, and I think that the best things they gave it to me is just like the freedom of self-determination, because like, my mom used to be a baker, now they're both in the fashion industry, and like, I don't even know how to bake, as you can see from the vegan brownie. Fashion industry didn't really catch on me. So they really let me be what I wanted to be, and so I'm really thankful for that. Maybe my sister can translate this. And here you see also like my brother-in-law, my sister, my beautiful niece Bianca, and thanks a lot to Ella, my sister, because probably is the closest person I have. I just have a bit of self-promotion now, just 1 minute. So I explained to you like that we can, how can we use technology to reduce or like to find alternatives for like for water supply, but also we can try to use like less water personally, and try to reduce our water footprint. I'm not talking about like taking shorter shower. So the majority of the footprint, your water footprint, is connected to the food you eat. So if you're switching to more a vegetarian diet, you can really like bring down your water footprint. So together with David, we're gonna like attempt to climb Denali in a plant-based diet, a vegan diet. So we call it like Vegan Ali, just to raise concern and raise awareness on this topic. This is also why all the refreshments, I know you guys are here also for that, it's gonna be all vegetarian and vegan. And with this, I just want to thank you all, and thank you so much for coming and showing up here.
here. Does anyone have any questions for Carlo?
Yeah, Alex, yeah.
And maybe cell viability
Yeah.
experiments of this clip. But how small a change in viability?
Yeah, I discussed this with the. So basically, like this, the survivability experiment were carried out actually by my other collaborators, and I asked him like, because for instance, here is even an increase in survivability, and I asked him like, what is like a meaningful? And they told me like, you want to see a drop to about like 60 or 50%. So otherwise, like, it's basically not meaningful. But again, this is just one cell culture and just one concentration, right? So what we're planning now, we're gonna do like 2 cell cultures, and also what we wanna like ramp it up the concentration until we start seeing like a response of the cell viability.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, there we go.
For a lot of these smaller compounds, problem isn't so much acute toxicity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there? Do you know whether there is any study that have they done anything on long-term
like-
exposure?
No, I mean this compound was first like isolated like basically 10 years ago, so there is no like chronic studies on that. So all the studies I've seen are just like acute exposure. Also, this concentration 10 ppm, just we calculated in a. So let's say like you're using a meter square of membrane, and this filtrate 1 liter of water, and you have like this dramatic case that the membrane like breaks, the graphene oxide ends up being in that liter of water and you just drink it. So this is a really like extreme scenario at NPPM. But yeah, we're just modeling like acute stuff. Yeah.
So in the all carbon membranes that you were preparing, they're designed for wastewater polishing,
Yes.
essentially, so that you could return that to drinking water.
Yeah.
But you still had fairly high monovalent salt concentration.
Yeah. So
Do you think that there's a next step that you could do with an all carbon membrane to
so I don't think like usually like in a reclamation facilities, if you can take the one for instance in California. So you have a microfiltration membrane, a nanofiltration, and then of course you have a reverse osmosis membrane, right?
Yeah.
So this will all be used for that particular step, nanofiltration. I don't think like you can use like graphene oxide for reverse osmosis because it's just like the channels that you're forming are just way too big for the monovalent ions. But what you can do, maybe you can embed graphene oxide in the TFC membrane, in the reverse osmosis membrane, just to increase a bit their chemical stability. But this fully carbon membrane, I don't think they can work for like reverse osmosis. So people sometimes ask me, "Oh, can you use for desalination?" Yeah, not really. Like it's used for like nanofiltration.
And what's the lifetime of these filters? Like, would they last? Like, is there like a longevity?
I don't know. I have some backup slide. So the longest I tested is a week. Let's see. Some backup slide. Oh yeah. So basically, like these are like hours, and you can see actually these membranes go to a compaction stage. So you see a permeability drops. The permeability is the dashed line, and then you have the rejection solid line. And when the permeability drops and reaches steady state, you start rejecting contaminants. So I tested for about a week. Like when you want to build a commercial application, of course, this membrane has to last for years, right? I think the lifetime of like a polymeric membrane now is about like 5 to 7 years. So of course you want to test it for longer. But already the PhD is 4, right? But yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, we're going to thank Carlo again, and I'm going to ask everyone to leave the room for a moment.
You can, yeah, no. Can you leave it?
Yeah.
Then we should, when you guys are discussing, we just stop there. Or I should stop it.
Oh, yeah, you should.
Should stop
Stop
now.
now.
Because we're gonna.
Okay. Bye.